The lights hit hard, too bright, too sharp, like they wanted to expose every flaw on stage. Cameras rolled, the crowd buzzed, and the smell of cold studio air mixed with adrenaline. On the left podium, Governor Tim Walz adjusted his tie, a faint smirk curving his lips. Across from him, Donald Trump leaned back slightly, his trademark confidence wrapped in silence. This wasn't a debate, it was a duel. The host's voice sliced through the tension. "Governor Walz, your opening statement." Walz took the mic, his tone crisp, deliberate. "You know, Mr. Trump talks a lot about success. But when you look past the gold plating, what do you really see? Failed casinos. Bankrupt hotels. Broken promises. In business terms, that's what we call," he paused, savoring it, "a total failure." The audience gasped, half in shock, half in thrill. The jab landed clean, rehearsed, and sharp. For a moment, Trump didn't move. He didn't blink. He just stared across the stage, his jaw tightening. A flicker crossed his face, not anger, not yet, but something colder. Calculation. Then he smiled. That smile, the one his supporters knew, the one his opponents feared, spread slowly. He leaned toward the mic, voice low but steady. "You know, Tim," he said, "I've been called a lot of things. But coming from a guy who couldn't balance his own state budget." The crowd reacted instantly. Gasps turned into murmurs. The host tried to interject, but it was too late, the tone had shifted. This wasn't politics anymore. It was personal, and everyone watching, at home, online, in that packed studio, knew one thing. This night was going to burn into headlines. The air inside the studio was electric, charged with that unstable mix of ego, pride, and cameras. Every second felt heavier than it should. Tim Walz straightened his notes, pretending to stay composed, but the heat from Trump's comeback still hung in the air like smoke after a shot fired. Trump leaned closer to the mic, eyes gleaming under the bright lights. "You talk about failure, Tim. Maybe you should ask your taxpayers how it feels to live in one." The audience stirred, half laughter, half shock. Walz tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You can dodge numbers, Mr. Trump," he said, his voice tightening, "but you can't dodge reality. You left workers unpaid, investors broke. The only thing that ever profited in your name was your ego." The crowd oohed. The moderator raised a hand, trying to calm the rising tension, but it was useless now. Both men were past the point of civility. Trump's grin vanished. "You're talking about ego?" His voice sharpened. "You've been hiding behind your party's talking points since you stepped into office. You call me fake, but at least I built something." Cameras zoomed in. The lights seemed to pulse. The silence between them was louder than the applause. Then, Walz made a mistake. He stepped forward, breaking debate etiquette, eyes locked on Trump. "You didn't build anything," he snapped. "You inherited it, and then you ran it into the ground." That was it. The audience gasped. The room crackled. Trump's jaw set like iron. He didn't yell. He didn't interrupt. He just stared, eyes burning, lips pressed tight, the kind of stillness that came right before detonation. And across social media, clips were already cutting through timelines. "Walz goes too far." Trump silent. What's coming next? No one knew it yet, but the silence wasn't defeat. It was the inhale before a storm. For 12 full seconds, Trump didn't say a word. In TV time, that's eternity. The moderators exchanged worried glances, the crowd shifted, and even Walz's confident grin started to falter. Then Trump looked up, slow, deliberate, almost surgical. His hands rested on the podium, fingers tapping once, twice, like a countdown. His voice, when it came, was low and calm. Too calm. "You know, Tim, I've been insulted by presidents, prime ministers, billionaires. But none of them ever looked this nervous afterward." A ripple ran through the room. The audience laughed, then hushed, sensing the shift in tone. Trump straightened. His usual bravado faded, replaced by something colder, measured. "Dangerous. You call me a failure," he continued. But while you were spending taxpayer money on consultants to explain your own policies, I was employing thousands. You talk about inheritance like it's a sin, but I turned mine into skyscrapers, into paychecks, into a name you can't stop saying." The room fell quiet again. Walz blinked, visibly thrown off. This wasn't the loud, mocking Trump people expected. This was something else, composed, lethal precision. Then Trump leaned forward, voice cutting through the silence like glass. "The difference between us, Tim, you need this stage. I built it." Cameras flashed. A single line, perfect for replay, perfect for headlines, detonated across social media within seconds. #BuiltTheStage began trending before the debate even ended. Walz swallowed hard, forcing a chuckle that came out thin and forced. "That's cute," he said, "but this isn't a reality show, Mr. Trump." Trump's eyes didn't move. "It is now." And just like that, the debate stopped being about policy. It became theater. And in theater, there's only one rule: whoever controls the silence, controls the story. Something shifted in that room, a ripple too subtle for cameras but too heavy to ignore. The audience leaned forward as if instinctively drawn to the tension crackling between two men who no longer saw each other as politicians, but as predators in the same cage. Trump stayed still, his eyes locked on Walz. Every muscle in his face was carved in composure. The silence around him wasn't emptiness, it was dominance. He'd turned restraint into a weapon. Then he spoke, slow, deliberate, with that razor-edged calm that always came before the knockout. "Governor Walz, you said I'm a failure," he began. "But failure looks different when you've actually tried something. You sit behind a desk signing papers while I built cities." The crowd stirred. Trump's voice grew firmer, steady as a gavel. "You called me an embarrassment. But tell me, Tim, how many paychecks did your words ever write? How many workers fed their families because of you?" It wasn't just a rebuttal, it was a reversal. Each sentence peeled away Walz's control. Walz's smirk cracked. "That's a nice speech," he said, trying to recover, "but you're still talking about your own ego." Trump tilted his head slightly. "No, I'm talking about results. The thing your administration's allergic to." The audience broke, half gasped, half cheered. Even the moderators froze for a beat too long. The room wasn't neutral anymore. It had turned. Walz tried to push back, his tone sharp, almost trembling. "This country needs truth, not theatrics." Trump didn't flinch. "Truth? You can't even say your own state's unemployment numbers out loud." Boom. The crowd erupted again. On social media, clips looped with captions like, "Trump's most composed destruction yet," and "Walz walked right into it." But backstage, one of Walz's aides whispered what everyone else had started to realize. "He's not arguing anymore, he's performing surgery." And the operation had just begun. Walz's jaw tightened. He could feel control slipping, the rhythm, the audience, even the moderators now looked more like spectators than referees. His team had prepped him for insults, but not for this version of Trump: quiet, focused, deliberate. So he did what nervous politicians do when the ground starts to crumble. He overplayed his hand. "Let's talk results then," Walz shot back, stepping closer to his podium. "You left behind bankrupt casinos, unpaid contractors, and a trail of lawsuits long enough to wrap around Manhattan. If that's your version of success, maybe we should start calling failure your brand." The audience reacted, half with laughter, half with the uneasy silence that comes when someone pushes too far. Trump didn't even blink. He turned slightly toward the crowd, his tone dropping an octave, steady, commanding. "See, folks, that's what happens when someone's losing. They start talking about the past because they've got nothing to show in the present." Boom. The audience murmured in agreement. Trump leaned forward just enough for the camera to frame his face perfectly. "You can list my bankruptcies all night long, Governor, but guess what? I came back every single time. That's not failure, that's survival. And survival built this country." Applause rippled across the room. Even the camera operators felt the shift, the kind of moment every live producer prays for. Walz tried to interrupt, but Trump's voice cut through like a blade. You talk about losses like you've never had one. That's the difference between you and me. I fall, I rebuild. You fall, you call a press conference. The laughter that followed wasn't cruel, it was fatal. It meant Walz had lost the crowd. He tried to smile, but his eyes betrayed him, wide, uncertain, scanning for a way back. There wasn't one. Because in that single exchange, Trump had done what he always did best. He turned a wound into a weapon. And for the first time that night, Walz looked like he knew it. The room was still humming from Trump's last line when it happened, that perfect, accidental collision between pride and power that would loop across every screen in America before midnight. Walz, desperate to regain footing, forced a smirk. "You can talk about rebuilding all you want, Donald," he said, voice trembling just slightly, "but some of us don't need to file bankruptcy to learn humility." It was meant to sting. Instead, it detonated. Trump's eyes narrowed, just a flicker, then he did something no one expected. He laughed. Not the showman's laugh, not the smug one. A quiet, genuine chuckle. "You think humility is something you can learn, Tim?" he said, voice lowering, leaning into the mic like he was confiding in the nation itself. "Some of us learned it the hard way, by being told we'd never make it, by being laughed at, by proving every single one of them wrong." The audience froze. This wasn't a punchline. It was a confession wrapped in dominance. Trump took a step forward, just enough to fill the camera frame. "You want to talk failure? Let's talk about leadership. Leadership isn't about being liked. It's about standing when they tell you to sit down. You can mock me, Tim, but I've stood taller in failure than you've ever stood in victory." That was it. The quote. The viral spark. Phones came up like wildfire. Reporters typed frantically. By the time the debate ended, hashtags were already climbing. Hashtag stood taller, hashtag Trump strikes back, hashtag leadership line. Walz stood frozen, the weight of the moment hitting him too late. He tried to pivot, to speak, to defend, but the cameras weren't listening anymore. They had already decided what mattered. Backstage, one of the network producers whispered, "That's the clip. That's the one. We just watched a headline get born." And out in the world, the story wasn't about policies, or arguments, or facts anymore. It was about one sentence, delivered with the precision of a man who understood the game better than anyone. By sunrise, the debate was ancient history, the clip had taken over. Every news outlet, every platform, every phone screen pulsed with the same 10-second loop, Trump leaning forward, voice low and deliberate, "I've stood taller in failure than you've ever stood in victory." The timing was cinematic. The lighting flawless. The delivery, lethal. Cable news anchors broke it down like it was Shakespeare. One host on CNN sighed, "That line, it's not just a comeback, it's a character moment." On Fox, the Cheerin screamed, "Trump humiliates Walz, live." Meanwhile, in a glass conference room somewhere in Minneapolis, Walz's team sat in silence. The monitors replayed the clip on loop, every replay louder than the last. "Maybe we can spin it," one aide said weakly. "Spin what?" another muttered. "He didn't lose an argument. He lost a moment, and you can't win that back." Walz himself stared blankly at the screen. His reflection stared back, defeated. "How does he do that?" he asked quietly. "How does he take a hit and turn it into applause?" No one answered. They didn't need to. They were watching the answer. Online, Trump supporters flooded the comments. "That's the energy we need back. He just reminded everyone who runs the stage." Even his critics admitted it, grudgingly, painfully, the man knew how to own a moment. And somewhere in Florida, inside a gold-lit office, Trump watched the clip himself. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just muttered, almost to himself. "They'll call it a comeback. But I never left." He turned off the screen, leaned back in his chair, and exhaled. Because Trump understood something Tim Walz never did. In politics, the winner isn't who makes the best point. It's who owns the silence after the last word. By midday, the headlines weren't reporting the debate, they were weaponizing it. Every outlet twisted the story into its own narrative, each one louder than the last. CNN, Walz confronts Trump over failed businesses, sparks heated clash. Fox News, Trump silences Walz with one sentence heard around the world. MSNBC, debate meltdown, Walz's moral stand or Trump's masterstroke? It wasn't just a story anymore. It was content. Clips flooded TikTok. A slowed-down edit of Trump's "Stood Taller" line over dramatic music hit 20 million views in 6 hours. Someone captioned it, "Love him or hate him, this is what presence looks like." Walz's team scrambled to respond. They pushed out tweets, policy fact-checks, press releases. But it all drowned beneath the noise. Because the internet didn't care about nuance. It cared about dominance, and Trump had given it a soundbite that dripped with it. Meanwhile, pundits debated intent. Was Trump's moment rehearsed, or instinctive? A veteran strategist on a podcast answered bluntly. Rehearsed? Maybe. But what makes it viral is that it felt real. That's the secret, control that looks like chaos. Walz finally appeared on camera again, pale, tight-lipped, clearly coached. "I don't believe leadership is about applause," he said softly. "It's about accountability." But his voice trembled just enough to betray him. The clip was instantly memed with split screens of Trump's steely stare beside Walz's hesitation. The caption read, "Confidence can't be coached." That's when the tide truly turned. What had begun as a debate had become a digital battlefield, and Trump was winning not because he shouted the loudest, but because he knew when to stop talking. He didn't chase the story. He became it. 3 days later, the world wasn't asking who won the debate anymore. They were asking why Walz ever thought he could win that exchange. Polling data began to shift, subtly at first, then like a landslide. Focus groups didn't talk about policy or platforms. They talked about posture, tone, control. "He didn't yell," one viewer said about Trump. "He just owned it." Another chimed in, "You could feel who believed himself more." Meanwhile, Walz's campaign struggled to reboot. Every interview, every press event, circled back to that one moment. One journalist asked bluntly, "Governor, do you regret calling Trump a failure?" He hesitated, half a second too long. "I regret that people focused on the insult instead of the issues." Too late. That quote hit social media before he even left the building. The comments were brutal. "Still making excuses. He regrets losing, not talking. Never go after a showman if you don't know the stage." Inside Trump's camp, the atmosphere was electric. Staffers replayed the clip like game tape, studying every word, every pause. One aide grinned, "You didn't destroy him with facts. You destroyed him with timing." Trump shrugged. "People remember how you make them feel," he said simply. He made them uncomfortable. I made them entertained. That night, as late-night hosts roasted Walz and replayed the viral quote for laughs, one producer whispered off camera, "He's not just winning debates, he's rewriting performance politics." And just like that, a line meant as insult had turned into legend. Total failure in business had become the spark for Trump's most dominant comeback yet. By morning, even critics were admitting it, the game had changed again. And everyone knew who changed it. The stage lights were gone. The headlines had cooled. But the echo of that debate still lingered, in tweets, in think pieces, in late-night monologues that couldn't stop replaying the moment. Tim Walz returned to Minnesota quieter than usual, each appearance more careful, each word filtered through consultants who now feared spontaneity. His staff called it damage control. But it looked more like retreat. Trump, meanwhile, didn't chase the afterglow. He didn't have to. His silence was the afterglow. At a rally days later, he finally addressed the viral moment, casually, mid-speech, like it barely mattered. They said I was finished, he told the crowd. They said I was the failure. But you don't build something this big by listening to small minds. Cheers erupted. Flags waved. The crowd wasn't just clapping for Trump, they were clapping for defiance. He raised a hand, letting the noise crest and fade. "See, that's the difference," he said, voice dropping low. "Some people fight for applause. I fight for proof." That one sentence sealed it. Clips of the line hit social media within minutes, edited over cinematic music, labeled "The Return of Trump." Back in D.C., a veteran political reporter summed it up best. Walz threw a punch. Trump built a moment. And in politics, moments win elections. Because the truth wasn't in who was right or wrong. It was in who commanded the silence after the storm. And as America kept replaying that debate, one thing became undeniable. In a world where every word is a weapon, Trump had once again proved. He still knew how to pull the trigger. In the end, this wasn't just a debate, it was a reminder that power isn't about volume, it's about presence. Some people talk to be heard. Others speak, and the world listens. If you felt that, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because stories like this don't just report history, they define it.